Hello and welcome back. Basically, there's a confusion around the fact that there are other creation stories, there are other stories of the flood, there are other stories of languages being confused. But people are trying to use this as a gotcha against the Bible and against the history, the holistic history of the universe, best preserved in Jubilees and the Pentateuch. But actually, this doesn't disprove anything. This only proves it further. Because if we wanted to look at an ancient text that we found and we wanted to see if it was real or true, we would look for other similar texts that aren't the same, that leave out certain things and include other things. That's how you cross-analyze, and that's what makes history. That's what makes ancient texts. That's what makes study. I mean, that's our history, is different people writing. If you put lots of people in a room and they watch the same thing and they're all asked to write down what happened, they're going to write it differently, and that's natural. And so the fact that there's all these other accounts of Genesis, of the flood, and of the Tower of Babel does not disprove anything. It proves things. What you see when you look at all these other texts is that the best version of these accounts, the most clear, the most lucid, the one that makes the most sense by far, is the Pentateuch. Now, the Pentateuch teaches us, for example, about the one true God creating the world, something from nothing. And this is something that science only came to in the last few decades when they discovered the radiation from the Big Bang and they realized there was a start to the universe. Before, a few decades ago, science believed that the universe had just always been. But now even they have to admit that the universe was created. If the universe was created, it means before the creation there was nothing. And so there's something from nothing. And what can set off nothing to become something? Only God. That's the only answer to that riddle. Because you can't have anything setting it off. Something has to set things off. And if there's literally nothing, pre-universe, pre-existence, pre-creation, nothing can set off anything. So God, that is beyond time and space, that is beyond us all and also within us all, makes us all up and is also part of the greater whole of us all. That's the only thing that actually makes sense, that makes the most sense by far. So just to back up a little bit, there are around 10 to 15 major creation myths in the ancient Near East and beyond, with fewer direct parallels to Genesis's monotheistic model. For example, Enuma Elish in Babylon, 18th to 12th century, which is from Nineveh. Chaos to order creation, like Genesis 1. There's a Sumerian creation myth from the 3rd millennia BCE. In Nippur, heaven-earth separation, similar to Genesis. There's a Memphite theology from Egypt from around the 25th century BCE, Memphis, creation by speech, like God said in Genesis. Noah's flood story. There are over 200 flood narratives globally, spanning Mesopotamia, Greece, India, China, Mesoamerica, and indigenous cultures, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, which I read, Akkadian from around 2100 BCE, Nineveh. I actually didn't know when I was reading it that I was going to come across the flood story. It was extraordinary. Then there is the Akkadian Atrahasis epic from around 17th century BCE, Sippar, and Eridu Genesis, Sumerian, around 3rd millennium BCE. So this is what these stories are saying happened at that time. Overall, there is an idea that there was a global flood and that God saved one family, and this is repeated over and over throughout the world. And that makes sense because if we all come from the same people, Noah's family, then everyone's going to have certain stories. Like, they're going to remember what they remember from these texts, but not everyone carried the ancient texts in the ancient Hebrew, the language of creation. There's also Tower of Babel stories, which we know it in the very, very whole sense, even though it's so brief in both Jubilees and the Pentateuch in the Torah. So brief, just a few verses, really, the whole Tower of Babel story. But it's telling us a story that the reason God confused all the languages was because mankind was trying to reach heaven. But there are all these examples where they don't necessarily talk about this tower, but they talk about this event. Then they say that there was a unified language. For example, in Sumeria around 21st century BCE, Enmerkur and the Lord of Arata, which says there was a unified language split by a god, and that's just like in Genesis 11. There's a Popol Vuh, a Mayan ancient oral tradition. Divine language diversification scatters tribes. Could be they heard this. Whatever it is, people remembering this event lends credence to it having occurred, not the opposite. And the Exodus story also, there are archaeological or textual clues that provide context. For example, the Ipawar papyrus from the 13th to 19th century BCE Egypt, chaos resembling Exodus plagues. There are the Amarna letters from the 14th century BCE, Habiru and Canaan unrest, hinting at Israelite arrival. Yeah, the Habiru stuff is about the Israelites. And the Merneptah stele from 1208 BCE Thebes names Israel in Canaan, supporting post-Exodus presence. There are examples from the ancient world of texts that talk about Israel and the events that occur in the Bible. They're not created in a vacuum. And the fact that other texts exist and other papyrus and steles, which are large stones that are engraved in, the fact that these exist proves that this is real stuff and not made up. I personally know my family history to the pages of the Bible, and I know that my family history only makes sense because it comes from those pages of the Bible. This is one continuous story that my family has laid down their lives in order to maintain the Hebrew language, the ancient texts. So, all right, so I hope that that speaks to this claim, this idea that because there are other stories that are similar, somehow this disproves something. It's quite the opposite. All right, have a wonderful day. Thanks for watching and listening. This is Modern Jubilees, and we'll see you next time.